What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
Just like 2016, this is a scary moment. It is revealing a lot about the true nature of America and Americanism. And I think it's important for us to just acknowledge that fact, that it's overwhelming to realize how vitriolic and divisive and filled with hate and xenophobia this country is at the same time. That is also what this country was founded on these foundations of genocide, of manifest destiny, of white hegemony and supremacy. And so what we're seeing now is a confrontation with a foundational truth that hasn't been structurally dealt with, that hasn't been structurally confronted and overcome. And I think it's really important to ground ourselves in that, because when we understand the foundational reality, it helps us not needlessly point the fingers at each other and blame each other for the fact that a candidate won, or lead us to needlessly pointing the finger at each other when the lesser evil loses. And for a lot of people, the lesser evil isn't good enough. This election really means a lot of things on a personal level, in terms of being the child of immigrants, being someone that wrote a book about my family's immigration journey, being someone that is interested and invested in colonization. I think what the possibilities are for the border and immigration is really, really terrifying. And I'm really thinking about the ways that I can help the people that are personally in my life. And I'm also thinking about ways that mutual aid can be organized around outside of just even moments of crisis. Because it really is a scary thought to me, the idea that the House, the Senate, and the president is all Republican. It's all Republican. And from that standpoint, I think there's a lot to lose. I think there is a lot that we really need to be educated on in order to know how to resist and pay attention and intervene accordingly. So we should just really start there. I think we can look at the demographics and be like, you voted for this person and you voted for that person. I think people that are voting for Trump, people are voting for Trump for a variety of reasons. Some of it is pure white supremacy. Some of it is being tricked into thinking that being adjacent to white supremacy or whiteness or capitalism will save us. So it's either it's one of those two, or something else, or a belief that we can really return to an America where people are enslaved, and that's going to help certain kinds of people. And I think people just want to return. I think America repeats itself, and we're dealing with the aftermath of another repetition. And once again, we have to decide, is this repetition going to be something that we intervene on differently than they did in the past? Are we going to build on the lessons that they learned from the past? And in every single cycle of repetition in this country, in this American project, in this colonial project, it's important to understand who the real enemies are. The real enemies are capitalism, white supremacy, colonization, and imperialism. And if we can start from there, we can begin to see that it's not entirely the fault of individuals for being swayed by a system that will lie to us, use populism to garner political support in our votes, and still won't give the masses of people in this country the things that they need for an equitable life, whether that be a livable wage, whether that be healthcare, whether that be decent working conditions. All of these are things that either side of the aisle has failed to offer. And we as the masses need to realize this and begin to organize around that very bare material fact, instead of blaming each other for things that is actually the state's fault. Even though people can corroborate the state. Was Trump winning this election surprising? I mentioned this in my last video that it wasn't surprising. I come back to it again. America repeats itself. In 2016, when I was so mad about all of the fanfare around Bernie and how all of that wouldn't really translate to people that supported him really getting into organizing, even though I can't speak for everyone that supported him, I was pissed off. And when Trump won then, I was in Standing Rock and I was witnessing indigenous people being brutalized, and my friend was arrested and I was arrested. And I was just thinking, the fact that the powers of the state are against indigenous people in this militant and brutal and visible way, it's literally history repeating itself. And when Trump won, I just thought, this is happening because America hasn't really confronted like some real ass shit about what it's done in the past, and that the fruits of that evil history are being remarketed to us. And for some people, That's an attractive marketing plan. The idea that you lock the immigrants out, you build up our borders, you let companies do whatever they want, then we'll get rich, right? Deregulation will help us get rich. You know what deregulation also leads to? Slavery.
I feel like these cops are trying to get us to move this barricade because what they want to do is they want to move this camp out of here right here. Because this, you can see where the pipeline is coming. So they're going to try to come through here. And I feel like when they do that, they're just going to fucking arrest everyone, dude. These people have been oppressing us for over 500 years. I'm tired of this shit, to be honest. You know, I'm here to make a change. And if we have to do it this way, then we're going to have to do it this way.
Police line's moving forward now. You can see police officers with automatic weapons between the two vehicles. So there's people who are moving the vehicles for the police now.
In these cycles of history repeating itself, people that are marginalized and vulnerable will inevitably suffer, will inevitably face violence that people of other privileges and other demographics don't have to face. People that are undocumented will have to face certain kinds of violence that people who are documented won't. People that are documented and of a certain demographic or background or ethnicity are going to have to face certain kind of violences under a Trump administration that other people won't. And the sheer reality of this doesn't mean that Kamala should have won, because Kamala still had to earn people's votes and the Democratic Party still had to earn trust. But it does mean that we're seeing a more core and base evil on a more visible level. And that doesn't mean that it deserves to be visibilized, but I think it also means that we need to be very intentional about how we confront it and how we organize amongst each other. And I think that is really, really important. There's both an individual responsibility and a collective responsibility to intervene on this larger structural history that is happening to all of us. When I try to synthesize what a Trump 2.0 presidency means, I think about some of the statistics about who voted for him. And if we're looking at NBC News, there are statistics about who voted for Trump in key states. 42% of men voted Democrat, 55% voted Republican, 53% of women voted Democrat, 45% of women voted Republican. Among whites, oh my God, 57% voted Trump. White people, what are y'all doing? Black people, 85% of black people voted Democrat. That's what I really want to turn to. 85% of us voted for the Democratic Party. And you saw all that news, black men don't want to vote for, black people voted for Democrats. Hispanics, Latinos, 52% Democrat, 46% Republican. And I think those numbers are interesting because I think there's been a lot of news about how a lot more Latinx people have swayed more Republican during this election, and how there's a lot of talk about colonization and disinformation and being invited into the American project while being insulted by it. I think that's an interesting thing that black people also have to think about. It's interesting. White men, white women, 60% voted Republican, 53% voted Republican. Black men, 77% voted Democrat. Black women, 91% of black women voted Democrat. And so what these numbers mean is, I think that once again, minorities tend to be swayed more Democrat, even though we can see the more specific numbers state by state showing that disinformation and Trump's xenophobia and bigotry and his boisterousness did work for a lot of populations of people that come from marginalized communities that want a strong leader. And what feels really important to kind of talk about here is that we are looking at minority groups in the U.S., minority groups that are denigrated in large numbers on a media level and used as scapegoats for policy, like Latino voters. We're watching them also simultaneously believe in disinformation about their own communities. We're watching them accept white supremacist, manifest destiny, invasion kind of ideologies around the border and immigration. And there are also undocumented people working to help build the border wall. And so there's a very serious consideration here about how the U.S. is swaying more and more towards adopting minority groups into these processes of colonization, these processes of otherization, and encouraging these minority groups to extract from the land here, which has already been genocided and displaced and stripped. And so it's a very insidious thing to go through an election to realize, oh, not only are all skin folk not kinfolk, like not all people of color are liberal, are against fascism, like to be given proximity to whiteness and white supremacy and colonization is to be given capitalist prosperity. They want someone who isn't going to give money to our military operations in other parts of the world. They want to invest that money here. They're hoping for the trickle-down effect. But the trickle-down effect historically hasn't worked for not only marginalized people, but the most of the masses that make up most of the workforce. And I think that is one of the errors of what Trump is selling. And once again, I think over the next 4 years, we're going to see the truths around the false promises that a Trump administration has made, especially on an economic level in terms of what it's pitching to the middle and lower class. Tax cuts. There's going to be tax cuts for the rich. Mark my words. Let's look at the next 4 years and see how much taxes Elon Musk pays. Just mark my words. We're talking about that here. And I think what it also kind of reiterates that I think is both scary to realize for some people who their rights and their livelihoods are at risk, and for people that are maybe a bit more indebted ongoing decolonial process. It's the fact that white supremacy and self-preservation is still very much an American ideal.
What would you want Trump to do on day one?
On day one, well, we got to close the border. That's it. Everything trickles down from the closing of the border.
The first thing I want him to do is pardon every single January 6th protester.
Immigration, trade and jobs, and endless wars, ending the endless wars. I think those are going to be priorities for the new GOP moving forward.
I'm interested in protecting our borders. I'm interested in giving less money to foreign wars.
Do you think Trump will stop the war in Gaza?
I think he intends to. I think there are people around who may not want to, but I don't think that they're going to have the final say. Trump is an anti-war president. I think he will try to bring Gaza to a ceasefire.
He's just going to come in and be like, I'm going to do whatever the I want, because I've been given a mandate.
We can argue that America has moved forward, that we've gained civil rights, that there's black representation in office, but we can also see very materially that white supremacy and fascism are attractive ideologies to people that have a lower sense of social media and media literacy. It's attractive to people that are poor and want to point the fingers at other people and are tired of immigrants coming in and are believing the rhetoric around how we need to keep more for ourselves. There is so much scarcity that America needs to keep more for itself and lock people out in order to take care of ourselves. And I think this is really a holdover from Manifest Destiny's deep-seated idea of American exceptionalism, which is, as long as we survive, everything will be okay. American survival historically has meant indigenous genocide, anti-black violence, xenophobia. It has also meant white vigilante justice. And I think when we permit the justifications for an economic model that needs to have people at the bottom, that needs to lock people out, that needs to profit off of war, carcerality, and misery, that violence will not just be restricted to the people that our administration is saying will be targeted now. It spreads and spreads and spreads, and it can involve everyone and anyone who isn't a part of the elite. The Republican Party will speak to this more directly and proudly, but the Democrats speak to it in coded language. On either side of the aisle, we have to be ready to call out the politics of individualism that are rampant in the West and in the US that encourage us to exploit other nations and places, and then to have selective memory about what kind of violences or trespasses have occurred in the past. This self-preservation thing goes as far as, like, recently I was talking to one of my best friends from high school who is black, a black woman, and she was like, oh, I don't think a Trump presidency will be that bad because I mean, some bad things happened, but like we were pretty much all right. And I'm like, do you remember Roe v. Wade being overturned? Do you remember the Muslim ban, making jokes about women? Do you remember him denigrating the press? Do you remember all of these material things that happened during his presidency that literally also led to people being deported, people having their asylum blocked, and literally children being locked up in cages? My friend couldn't pull all of this out of their head. I don't think they watch the news all the time, but I found it extremely disheartening to hear a fellow black person saying this. And I think the self-preservation element is what kind of kicks into some people's minds, where it's like, oh, I was mostly fine during the last Trump presidency. So, I mean, what could happen again? You also maybe weren't connected to communities that spoke to you about that violence, that you didn't have to bear witness to that violence, and therefore it was invisible to you. This time around, the playing field is different. The House is Republican. The Senate is Republican. The president is Republican. And so week one, day one, month one, things are going to start passing that I think people need to be aware of, people need to be prepared for, and people need to be militantly organizing and thinking around and developing resources and mutual aid in order to stop these things from happening, or at least attempting to intervene. Because if we're fine and we don't worry that someone else is on the line, then you become a part of the fucking evil. And so I had to talk to my friend and kind of work through things, and we don't disagree. I think it's just getting to that core part of us, which is, oh yeah, we have to be prepared to oppose white supremacy, not bend to it or be okay with it or see it as something that is a threat to other people and not to us. Another thing that I think Trump winning also shows is that Gaza matters, Palestine mattered, and Kamala having a also strong but slightly softer pro-Israel stance. There are millions of people in this country that just would not vote for Kamala if she couldn't be more ardently humanitarian about her stance on Palestine. And the fact that that wasn't something that was possible for the Democratic Party, that the uncommitted movement developed out of that in the DNC, I think is part of one of the lessons of Trump's win. It's to say that in moments of sheer terror and genocide and hyper parasocial connectedness to violence that's happening in other parts of the world that the US is literally funding, that will matter during an election season, and not speaking to that, not speaking out against that, is going to leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths and show you that the Democratic Party isn't moral enough to take a stance on that. So why would we trust them on the things that they claim that they're going to do in this country to help us? And I think this kind of also goes to the point that the illusions of democratic peace or the status quo or normalcy is not enough in face of the foundational realities of violence that both parties participate in. Trump won because what he is spewing and his administration is spewing is so attractive to people that want be able to say the things that Trump is saying. Honestly, I think that's why a lot of people voted for Trump. They're like, I'm not going to say it, but he's going to say it. They want to be a part of the powerful colonial nation that is able to make incisive decisions that come from some primal masculine place, and they want the sense of self-preservation that Trump is pitching. And what we don't need is self-preservation to survive America, capitalism, imperialism, colonization. What we actually need is community and mutual aid. Can you hear that plane in the background? The feeling of being defeated versus angry, because I do think there are a lot of emotions around losing and why we lost, and feeling defeated versus feeling angry. And here's what I'll say to that. I don't think Kamala losing is the same as the far left losing in our ongoing battle towards defeating imperialism, towards liberation. Kamala losing is a failure for the left establishment, the parts of the movement that want reform to get us closer to a revolutionary kind of reality, which I think is already its own particular strategy, which I don't necessarily agree with. The feeling defeated aspect of it is definitely in the fact that our material reality is going to change. The violence that is usually relegated to certain parts of the population or to undocumented people is going to be right outside of our doorsteps. It's going to be at our hospitals, at our schools, at our institutions. We're regulated to theoretically protect us, but now they can actually commit more intrinsic and overt violence against us. I think the feeling defeated element is, oh, we don't have a reality that will stop that from happening. We don't have the checks and balances that will stop a white man who has dozens of felonies from running for president. The visions of hope that we were given and offered by a Black Asian woman like Harris, and how that historical kind of comfort, that desire for a maternal figure to save us, it wasn't good enough. And it wasn't good enough in a country where patriarchy and misogynoir will lock out millions of people from already even attempting to maybe vote for Harris. And also Gaza and what is happening in Palestine will also stop a shit ton of other people for voting for Harris, because how can you vote for either candidate if neither of them can be anti-war? That's a difficult thing for me to grapple with. The fact that he won and then lost, and then there were all these trials, and then the Supreme Court was like, yeah, what you do while you're president doesn't really fucking matter. Like, it's fine. And then he won again. I'm angry, but it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing on a global level for America to be experiencing this. And that is what makes me angry, that the vision of hope I was sold through Harris, the reality behind that was like, oh, this white man can literally just do this. And It's happening. It's happening. A lot of people are going to suffer because we have been given a faulty electoral system to start. And the feeling angry comes from, I don't want a black imperialist to represent me. The feeling angry comes from people blaming me because they wanted me to vote for their human rights instead of voting because I actually believe in the candidate. Like, the feeling of anger for me comes from, there is so much suffering that is going to come out of the next 4 years. And there's so much trauma that we're going to have to deal with and so much burnout that we're going to have to deal with. And it makes me angry that we are being put through this. We will have to confront and face. Vulnerable people are going to be hurt, unalived by the future, the continuously violent policies of the state. That makes me angry, makes me want to really sit down and to work through a bunch of solutions and organize and work with my friends. And it's an anger that I don't want to forget all of these historical violences that are happening and how they are connected to what is happening right now. Like, these things are not separate for me. And I believe just as my ancestors were angry enough and righteous enough to fight for their freedom, to flee plantations, to jump off of slave ships, to sit in at counters, to fucking protest for their voting rights, to fucking burn down shit in Baltimore, all of that shit, all of those freedom struggles. That anger is in me and it should be in you. If we organize and communicate and work through the confusion and delirium of this moment, we can access that anger. We can realize, yes, we can hold each other accountable for certain aspects of our political reality, but the real things that we should be holding accountable are the systems that permit white supremacy, colonization, capitalism, and xenophobia.
So America chose its flavor of fascism. You mean to tell me that the settler colony is going to use violence on the people that it needs to exploit? Shit. I actually think I've heard that one before. I actually think we know what to do. Maybe not everything, but I think we have some ideas on how to get us where we need to be. And where we need to be is a decolonial revolution. Who knows what the textbooks will say in the future? Maybe we're already in it. I'm talking about direct aid. I'm talking about mutual aid. I'm talking about organizing. Direct aid and mutual aid is a great place for a lot of people to start, especially because there's so many different things for folks to do. And finding a niche and being able to specialize and have community and use your skills and your labor in a way that benefits and builds something that serves people's needs outside of a for-profit system, that's the kind of practice we need. And one other thing is, you don't just need to go join an organization either. You don't just need to start one either. Not everything needs to be an organization, and not every organization is a mass organization. Organize your community, the people you know, the bars you go to, the spaces you occupy, and federate and meet other people. That way, if there's a protest, a gathering, a direct action, a study group, you're with people you like and can be in community with. And if you start mutual aid networks within those circles, now we're talking about mutual aid. And I'm not just talking about something to be of self-service so that you and your 6 people can all afford your Starbucks lattes. I mean, maybe a little coffee collective. If everyone's so interested in the coffee, y'all get together, y'all grind the beans, y'all do everything. Very specifically, it could be meal prepping stuff for the whole group, whole place. You want fancy food? Maybe a labor of love in a couple of days. You and gang can get together and do that together. Meal prep it out for the week and everybody's got something to eat. Soup parties. Great idea. And these things are things that can build. Things that organically affect you materially, and you are deciding that this is something that me and the people around me are going to start getting active around. I also highly recommend folks start. Another thing, digital hygiene and digital security. What do I mean by that? By hygiene, I mean how we carry our space. By hygiene, I mean how we carry ourselves on the internet, how our phones, laptops, and any sort of technology we use is and can harbor and store data that can not work out too well for you if it's publicized. From things from period trackers to private messages, anything, things that you're downloading for skills and resources that one day might become criminalized. I mean, I remember personally, there was a point in which an info shop I was at, the stuff we were distributing around abortion access in Ohio was technically illegal for about 5 to 6 months. These are the sorts of things you don't want to get caught up on because revolutionaries and radicals are already going to be going to prison, to jail. We don't need to go any sooner than we need to. And that's the next thing I'll say. We are going to be repressed. The backswing is going to be crazy, but that doesn't mean we're over. You're an organizer. You're a community member. You can do that while you're sitting. The struggle goes where you are. Be the struggle. Negate what oppresses you. And the one thing that's lifelong is education. Educate yourself, educate the people around you, and being able to study communally and having those conversations together is what leads to a more collective consciousness. It leads to a more beautiful, dynamic, and cohesive understanding of what relationships are around us and how we can take steps to move forward together. And together is a really, 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 really big part of this whole thing is you want to be envisioning, strategizing, organizing, and moving together, informed together. That's why I say organize your community. People that you have political stake with and you also have affinity with. That should be your smallest base, or that can be your smallest base. Because another thing is to always be critical. Absolutely no way is there one blueprint for how we're going to get to where we need to be. Because we don't even all agree on where we need to be. And I think that's why we need to come together now and practice actual conflict resolution, actual mediation. And this is where we practice the processes that actually let us talk to people we don't agree with, make collective decisions about the air, water, land that we all inhabit and exist with. And we're not going to all ever agree, but it's the beauty of a process that keeps us together and unified. That being said, skill shares is another great way to build up people's capacity to resist the state while also sharing and decentralizing information so that the velocity of power and the ability for leadership is abundant. And that informs how much we can continue to resist, how much we can continue to build. Because it's not just about resisting, it's about building something so that we can be self-governing. Building something that can allow us to actually just live our fucking lives, have our needs met in this abundancy of skills, of knowledge, of information, that when we come together to make these collective decisions, way more people are informed and way more people actually know what we're talking about. Because if someone is affected by a decision, they should be in the decision-making room. And that informs how much we can continue to resist, how much we can continue to build. Because it's not just about resisting, it's about building something so that we can be self-governing. Being able to hold space for each other and still respect the individual in the collective, and the collective that holds and guards and protects the individual, we'll be able to move forward into something that transforms how we even think about governing, how we even think about politics. And it's that sort of impact that can really sustainably, truly, mostly be done at the grassroots.
What do we do when our system fails? I'm going to give you a few seconds to kind of consider it. It's a 6-letter word. What do you do when the system fails you, when your government is full of shit, when your president is a white supremacist, when you know rights are inevitably going to be taken away?
Ever since a little boy on the streets of Norfolk called me a nigger, I struck him back, and then I had to learn I had to learn that hitting back with my fist one individual was not enough. It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness to stand by and do what has to be done when it has to be done. You have to go back and reach out to your neighbors who don't speak to you. And you have to reach out to your friends who think they are making it good and get them to understand that they, as well as you and I, cannot be free in America or anywhere else where there is capitalism and imperialism until
you find any mode of resistance that you can. It's anti-fascism. It's understanding that there are going to be a lot of vitriolic and xenophobic and bigoted policies that are going to be passed, and we have to look at all of the fronts in which this can happen, whether it be our policing system, whether it be our military, whether it be schools, whether it be the border, whether it be our local businesses and bars, our churches. We have to be aware that anti-fascism is only going to continue to be on the rise on a state-sanctioned level and on an extrajudicial and militia and hate group level as well. We should be preparing to protect each other from ICE. We should be preparing to do cop watches and neighborhood watches, affinity groups being willing to show up at a library where fascists or an alt-right group is going to try and stop a trans person from reading. Should be about building out processes of community care that help people outside of those moments of crisis. So how are we gathering food for each other? How are we cooking with each other? How are we sharing resources so that we can make paying our rent or cost of living easier? How are we expropriating things in a way that make it less necessary for us to be engaged in the labor force? Building resource guides and zines and manuals that can be offered to people in your community, gathering things, and being able to offer the community what it needs. Study the Black Panther Party and their 10-point program and the different survival programs that they offer. How can we rethink local and grassroots healthcare? Any institution that the state says it's supposed to protect us, we're going to have to question whether or not it's actually going to protect us and try to work and organize locally around the ways that we can build up the resources and processes of care that replace the ways that the state have and currently do and will continue to fail us in the future. There's going to be a need for clandestine behavior. There's going to be a need for subversive action. There's going to be a need for people to do stuff that doesn't need to always be publicized in terms of getting resources, expropriating, and being antagonistic towards the state. Being ungovernable isn't always going to look like a state-sanctioned march. Being ungovernable and resisting a state that literally is codifying its bigotry isn't going to look like a petition, going to city council all the time and writing an op-ed. It's going to have to look like a lot of things. None of my thoughts or ideas about America as a colonial project or anything is meant to kind of minimize the suffering and violence that this country can commit. I believe state violence and white supremacist violence and misogynoir and bigotry and xenophobia is fucking horrible and real. A lot of that has torn apart my family. It's deported people in my family, traumatized me in a lot of ways throughout my childhood. The trauma of these systems are going to be things that we're going to have to deal with our whole lives, but also our relationship to how we deal with that trauma, how we cope with it, how we help each other work through it. Also going to be a process that we can work through our entire lives. And I think the latter, the process of finding beauty and resistance and hope and militancy, it's even more life-giving than the death-making processes and institutions that our government offers us. I hope this video offered a lot of thoughts and considerations. Either by the end of the year and the new year, I plan to come out with at least one long or maybe even a series of videos of my comprehensive guide to direct action.
Counterattack from the soldiers.
Started cop watching, I just put my stickers on it, put a picture on my camera so when the police looking, they could see that cop watch sticker on there. Got some walkie-talkies, there's 2 of them for me. So when I leave, I get one to my wife. So the cops don't come in Canfield no more doing none of that crap. They do stranger stuff. And that's because we done changed. We made them change what they doing. That's all I want, Don't give them an opportunity to gun somebody down in the street. Be out there to watch them. I don't go out with no weapons or nothing like that. I go out with my camera, that's my weapon, and the fact is that since the police are not being held accountable, we have to hold them accountable.
Regardless of who is in office, we should probably be opposing this shit anyway. We should be fighting it. We should be, if we are demanding reform, we should be demanding reform that reduces the state's power to commit evil over us. If we have a Democratic candidate and they're like, we need a better military, a better border, that's them giving money to the military and the border. They just call it better. Really be real about, is it reform towards life and autonomy? Is it reducing the state's power? Or is it reform towards progressive policies that really just give more resources to the state and legitimize the function of it? Comment on this video with what you've been feeling this week, different considerations you have had, thoughts you're feeling, and let me know what you want to see in that comprehensive guide to direct action video, because I'm excited to work on it, but it's going to be a lot of fucking research. But I'm going to go and enjoy this weather. Okay, it's time to go. I filmed this video and we've been outside and I now have to poop, so